Welcome to a fast overview of the main cities of the American Revolution, in particular Boston and Philadelphia, and to a lesser extent, New York City. The big cities back then had about 30,000 people, which is nothing today in terms of our big cities. But Boston and Philadelphia would be the places that we'll talk about consistently as the birthplace of the American Revolution. Boston, in particular, was famous for several things in the lead up to the American Revolution. In 1770, quite famously, what would occur is what we know of as the Boston Massacre. Now, looking in detail at this, it's sort of difficult to characterize this as a massacre today. This is the spot here in the middle of downtown where this took place. Amidst all the skyscrapers, you still have the preserved old building, where outside of which the colonists basically spent hours throwing things and getting right into the faces of these British troops, insulting them, hitting them with snowballs and rocks and oyster shells, and eventually one British soldier will fire. When this happens, all these men with guns drawn, they will all fire. 5 men dead, and John Adams will come to work with the British soldiers as their lawyer because he feels that they, in a country of law and order, that they should have some representation. And so he catches a lot of grief for this. His cousin Samuel Adams is the head of the Sons of Liberty. He catches a lot of grief for this, and they essentially acquit the British soldiers. So they're not guilty of premeditated murder. They were reacting, and they were sort of scared into this. And so that's the side of the massacre in 1770. By 73, the Tea Act has so enraged Bostonians that they decide to dress up like Native Americans and sneak over to this part of the harbor and climb aboard a ship called the Beaver. And this is the museum today that's built with a new version of the Beaver. And I think it's $25 to $50 a person. I didn't go on it myself, but some other people who've done it said that they enjoyed it. But either way, they'll throw that into the harbor, and the British will respond by shutting down the entire harbor. And so things keep escalating. They keep heating up. And by 1775, the British will be hearing that there is this big store of ammunition and guns and supplies outside of Boston at Lexington and Concord. And famously, the British sneak out at night, and the American colonists will send out what we call the Midnight Riders. Famously, Paul Revere is one of these riders. Paul Revere is famous because Longfellow, a famous poet, would immortalize him in a poem. But there were guys like Israel Bissell who actually rode not only around Boston, but actually rode then all the way to New York City and then to Philadelphia, doing a much further distance than Paul Revere would ever dream of. So we remember Paul Revere, we don't remember Israel Bissell, but that's kind of the way history is. Paul Revere was also the guy that painted the Boston Massacre, quite famously, and painted Crispus Attucks, a black and Native American person, painted him as a white person to try to create more rage and more anger. But either way, it's at Lexington and Concord that the British troops sneak out, trying to catch the colonists unaware, and they are met on the road by Minutemen. And it's there that one guy will fire a shot. And once the firing begins, it's the way it goes, everybody's going to fire. And essentially from this point on, we have an open, shooting conflict that will become the American Revolution. And so here is the bridge at Concord, where the Minutemen meet them and head them off. And the British will have to retreat hastily back to Boston. What then occurs is basically Washington's able to get his hands on some cannons, and he sneaks them into Boston. At the southern end, there is a high point in Boston that is known as Dorchester Heights. And so there today is a monument, and you can see it right here. This was the highest ground. And with this view overlooking the city, he sneaks the cannons up. The British look up one day and see that Washington has all these cannons. And they realize their position's not defensible. They're just going to get hammered with cannon shells. So they take all their stuff and they put it on ships and they sneak out of Boston. They leave Boston. Washington had no gunpowder. It was an elaborate hoax. He couldn't fire those guns, but it scared the British enough to leave. And so that is Boston. New York City will then be the site of the largest battle. And that will go very badly for Washington. He loses 3/4 of the nation's army. Washington loses most battles that he fights during the American Revolution. His greatness is that he continues on and is able to keep America going during this time. But the other major city that we have to talk about is what will become the nation's capital. And so this is Philadelphia. And here in kind of a little bit away from kind of what is today's modern downtown of Philadelphia, exists this mall, M-A-L-L. And a mall is a walking space. Today we have shopping malls, but this is just a mall, a walking space. And so at the end of this mall is arguably the most important building historic building in our nation's history. This is Independence Hall. And this is where they will meet and decide and declare independence. Thomas Jefferson will write the Declaration of Independence a couple buildings over here at what's called the Graph House. And so he will stay up and write this declaration, listing all these grievances as to why we are leaving England. But either way, they all sign this document. And this document essentially makes them all out to be traitors. And as a traitor, as someone who had committed treason, they were going to draw and quarter you. They were going to kill you in a very ugly and public manner. And so here it's in this place that they decide that they've had enough, to the point of risking their lives to sign this document. John Hancock famously signs it, the largest of all of the signers. A lot of stories, we don't really know how true it is. We don't really believe it's a true story, that he said, I want the King of England to see my signature. I want him to see it big and bold. But either way now, putting your John Hancock on something basically means putting your signature on it. So, and it's there at Independence Hall later on that we would also have the Continental Congress, and we would also have what's called the Constitutional Convention years later, when we decide to vote on a constitution. So it's in this building, quite famously, that America will declare its independence and create the document that has our government in place that we have today. And so this is a very famous and important building here in the heart of Philadelphia. And so should you ever get confused as to when this revolution takes place, just remember that Philadelphia's sports teams, they have the eagle, which is the symbol for our country, and their sports team for basketball is the 76ers, from the year 1776 when we declared our independence. Boston, for their part, has the Patriots. And so thank you guys for this sort of quick listen and overview of these two main and very important cities in the American Revolution.